It's time for the Writer's Block. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the Oklahoman newsroom, joined by Cedric Golden from the Austin American-Statesman newsroom. Hey, Ced, what's up?
Not a lot, Jenny. What's up?
Well, let's get started this week with our lead, and the lead this week has got to be about fan and player decorum. Big story here out of Oklahoma City, but it's really permeating everywhere after Russell Westbrook had a dust-up with a fan during the Thunder's game in Utah earlier this week. But Cedric, you and I have been around long enough. We've seen these sorts of issues percolate throughout time, throughout different sports. You know, you've seen it up close. I'm sure we all do. Is it really just gonna happen? I mean, is this sort of where we are with what fans think they should be able to do, player interaction? I mean, is this just kind of a fact of life anymore?
It is, and I'm going to tell you why. Social media has emboldened these fans to think that they're part of the action now. It's allowed fans to reach out to famous people and say things to them on Twitter or on Instagram that they wouldn't say to them if they bumped into them on the street. Russell Westbrook has a short fuse to begin with, and he's had problems in Utah before, and he's been outspoken about the fans' behavior in Utah, the racism involved, and it turns out that this guy that claimed that he just told Russell to ice up his knees has said some really classless things about Russ on his Twitter profile, and he also deleted those tweets, but people saw them before he deleted them. So he's been banned for life by the Utah Jazz, which was a smart move. Russ was fined $25,000 by the NBA, which is basically a slap on the wrist. And I think Adam Silver basically showed support of Russell, but Russell said some things that let me know that he was ready to go off. And we don't need to see another Malice in the Palace 15 years later.
No, we do not. Yeah, it really reminds me of the whole, Ron Artest laying on the scores table. Here comes the beer. Here he goes. Steven Jackson joins him, running into the stands there in Detroit. It hasn't been that long ago, 15 years, you referenced it, Cedric, but the fact that fans at basketball, it really is a different dynamic when you see how close fans are at basketball games nowadays. Football, they have to be farther away. Baseball, they have to be farther away. Hockey, they're behind the glass, obviously. So you don't really have that same interaction that you have at basketball games. And I hope it doesn't happen again. I hope we don't have another incident where fans and players actually get to the point of a physical confrontation. I will say, I do think a lot of fans, most fans, let's be honest, most fans out there are minding their P's and Q's. They're maybe they are yelling at players, but they're doing it in a way that does not get personal. And Cedric, I thought LeBron James was asked about this situation with Russell, and LeBron said, fans, they heckle, and you can heckle players without making it personal. And I think that's where this situation with Russell Westbrook, this fan in Utah, it crossed the line. It really got to a personal level where, Russell Westbrook felt like he was being dehumanized in some ways. So to me, you can heckle. I mean, we've all seen it. Cedric, the Texas Tech baseball fans over the years have been some of the best hecklers out there because they heckle without making it personal. We've all seen it. Fans can still do this sort of thing without crossing a line.
But don't talk about my wife. Don't talk about my kids. Yep. Don't get racial. That's not heckling. That's belittling. And like you said, that's trying to dehumanize, to minimize a person's humanity. And to me, I just think that crosses the line. I don't think that you have the right to do that. I don't care how much money you pay to get into a game. When you start to think that you're part of the action, remember, you're a spectator. You're there to watch, and don't make yourself part of the narrative. And Russell was right. Whatever the guy said to him, he would never walk up to Russ on the street and say it, because he'd be on his back looking up into the stars. So to me, there's never a time for Russell to say, I'm gonna blankety blank you and your wife. But I understand the anger, and a little cultural lesson here. When a black man says, on everything I love, quote on everything I love. That means he's been pushed to the brink, and the time for talk is over. That let me know that Russell Westbrook was about to blow. That could have gotten really ugly.
Yeah, and I think it bears keeping in mind that Russell Westbrook is not he doesn't shy away from interaction with fans. He's regularly having conversations, back and forth with fans. He almost welcomes it. I think it's one of those things that, they may be going back and forth, but he sort of has that look in his eye that, he enjoys the give and take for the most part. But, to some degree, I think fans may be kind of looking to engage him, and he doesn't seem to shy away from that. But I do think there comes a point where if you cross that line, Cedric, you brought it up, he's brought it up, other players have brought it up, that needs to be not crossed. And so you can do that without crossing that line. Fans have fun, enjoy it, engage if that's the opportunity that you want to seek out when you go to an NBA game. But there's a line. Everybody needs to be aware of that. I applaud the Jazz for taking the stand that they did. They did their investigation. They got the video. They talked to eyewitnesses, to people that were around this fan. So the fact that they did what they did, made a quick decision to say we're not going to allow this, I think is important. And it's going to be on all teams to be mindful of this, because players in the aftermath are saying, listen, we hear this kind of thing everywhere. So everywhere, fans need to be paying attention, keeping that in mind, that crossing that line of human decency, if you will, is really really something to keep in the forefront of your mind if you are sort of having a back and forth or talking to these players, yelling at these players, that sort of thing. All right, let's get to another segment. It's another basketball segment. We're going to go by the numbers this week, Cedric, and everybody's talking about March Madness, Selection Sunday coming up. Who's on the bubble? Who's off the bubble? Give us a number to keep in mind as we think about NCAA tournament selections.
I'm going with number 6, and that's the amount of teams I think from the Big 12 that are going to make the NCAA tournament. This is not going to make me very popular in Austin, and they hate me anyway. I don't think the Texas Longhorns are going to make it into the tournament. I think they're going to lose to the Kansas Jayhawks and Oklahoma Sooners, who have been a favorite of Joe Lunardi for ESPN. The bracketologist, I think they're out too. Losing at the buzzer to West Virginia didn't help their cause. So I'm going Texas Tech, Kansas State, Kansas, Baylor, Iowa State, TCU. 6 teams from the Big 12 get in.
Yeah, and I think there's as many as 8 being talked about as potential NCAA tournament teams, with TCU also in the mix. They did win, beating Oklahoma State in the first round of the Big 12 tournament, so where's their stock? But here's my number, Cedric. I'm going with 7. That's the number of Big 12 teams that Oklahoma has defeated this year, and I think it's enough for them to get in. I know it's crazy. I know that a 7-12 team, a 7-11 team in the regular season, they just lost to West Virginia, as you mentioned, Cedric, is crazy to think. But Oklahoma's won 19 games. They've played no games against these the lowest quadrant team, which now the NCAA tournament selection is so keen on. I know you're against it, Cedric, but I think Oklahoma's in. I think it's their body of work. They had a great non-conference schedule, lots of wins. I think they get in, but I think people are going to crow about it, don't you?
I know they will, and especially if they get in at 7-11 and the 8-10 Texas Longhorns are left holding the bag.
Yeah.
Texas didn't take care of business in non-conference, and that's going to hurt them, I think. They beat North Carolina, which was a quality win. But you can't lose to Radford. You can't lose to Virginia Commonwealth. And you can't blow a 19-point lead in Waco in a must-win game. You also can't pull a no-show against TCU on senior day on the last regular season home game. So the Longhorns have to beat Kansas, or it's just not going to happen for them. Because if they lose to Kansas, they're 16-16. At least teams like TCU's got 20 wins. The Sooners have 19 wins, and those teams have taken care of business in other areas. Even if OU gets in at 7-11 over 8-10 Texas, that's just going to mean that the Sooners took care of business in non-conference and won some games that they needed to win to fatten up their record. Texas has no one to blame but itself if it misses this tournament.
Yeah, you know, Cedric, I think it bears in mind that whether it's how many teams get in from the Big 12 or does a 7-11 Oklahoma get in or not get in, a lot of that is going to depend on these other conference tournaments, what these other bubble teams do. And this is obviously very much a influx situation as we angle towards that Sunday late afternoon announcement of the field. 68 teams. It's still weird to say that for me.
It's not 64. I like the word. I like the number 64 more than 68.
Yeah, 64 for so many years, and then it expanded a little, and then a little more. And now we're at 68. So those first four games that'll be in Dayton on Tuesday and Wednesday next week, who will be in those games, who makes it, who doesn't. Obviously, always a point of debate, but the big question will be what happens in these other conference tournaments. I think the Big 12 has shown it has great depth in its league. Really only a couple teams that are truly out of the conversation at this point. So what happens in other conference tournaments? The Power Five, if you will, they've got some bubble teams. So does a team that is maybe in the conversation along the same lines as Texas, Oklahoma, TCU, do they win some games and maybe boost their stock? Do you have a mid-major that maybe makes a move and wins a conference tournament unexpectedly? It's really, it's always fun to me to have these debates, and you always are mindful, at least I am, Cedric, of teams in past years. You know, Maryland-Baltimore County a year ago, Loyola Chicago making it all the way to the Final Four. You wonder, who's that team this year? But you also think, is there a chance that one of those teams that could be that team gets left out entirely because of a Texas, an Oklahoma, a TCU? It could happen, but you're always looking for that next upset, that next Cinderella. Who's it going to be? I don't know who it's going to be, but it's always got to be a dance, don't you think, with the selection committee looking at these Power Five teams versus the mid-major teams?
It's not an easy job, and I don't envy those guys on that selection committee. I think if you're Texas, if you're in Oklahoma, teams like that on the bubble, even a TCU, you want the chalk to rule the day in these conference tournaments. You want teams that have won the regular season to win the conference tournament. You don't want what happened the other night, St. Mary's beating Gonzaga to win that conference tournament, because now two teams, is the Mountain West, I believe, teams from that conference are going to be in the big dance now. Yep. Gonzaga is being still talked about as a #1 team. They were the #1 team in the country when they lost. So that didn't help Texas's cause or OU. So, and I think, Jen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think a 7-11 team from the Big 12 has ever made it into the NCAA. Some 8 and 10s have made it, but I don't think a 7-11 has ever made it. And I do know a 500 team from the Big 12 overall. I mean, a 500 team overall in all of college basketball has never made the tournament since they expanded to 68. So Texas is the epitome of a bubble team. They finished 16-16. Their season is over as far as the NCAA's is concerned. My job has just begun because I'll be covering them at the NIT.
Well, by the way, a quick correction, West Coast Conference for Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Okay. I know, I forget too, so I corrected myself there as much as anything. But fascinating, always interesting to talk about who's in, who's not. We'll find out for sure Sunday when the Selection Sunday brackets come out. You can fill them out, pick your teams. I'm sure we'll be talking about that next week, Cedric. We'll be right in the middle of early action when we have our writer's block next week. But before we get out of here, let's do one more segment this week, and that's something I learned. And Cedric, I'm learning a lot about college admissions this week, and I know people might be saying, hold on, this is a sports show. What are you talking about college admissions in general for? Well, that's because the FBI announced the end of an investigation, some indictments, some charges that are out there relating to college admissions and bribery. And college coaches are involved with this, Cedric. It's a crazy tale. It hits close to home for you in Austin because at least one coach involved is a Texas coach, or now former, the tennis coach there. This is a crazy situation, but I guess maybe after the college basketball scandal that broke a couple years ago. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised at all this, but still, what's the talk? What's the vibe about all this, especially as it relates in a place where somebody's involved in all of this?
Well, you know, I miss the good old days when the boosters from these big time programs would show up with a bag of money.
Right.
The players got to get the money, and now coaches are accepting bags.
Yeah.
I didn't know it had come to that. So here in Austin, the tennis coach Michael Center is alleged to have taken $100,000 in bribes, including $60,000 in a hotel parking lot, so he could pass off a would-be student as a tennis recruit. So the scam part of it is, besides the bribe, is he would sign him to the tennis team. The kid quit the team and then just went about his business as a Texas student. The end game was just to get into the University of Texas, never even planning to play tennis. So it goes all the way up to this multi-billion-dollar corporation, this Key Foundation, where the ringleader, William Singer, I think that's
right. Yep.
Is alleged to have received millions and millions of dollars in bribes from all over the country, including Lori Loughlin from Full House. That's Aunt Becky.
Aunt Becky. Oh my gosh.
And William H. Macy, the cooler, who's been in a lot of Coen brother movies. So I am shocked. The Texas tennis coach is no longer the Texas tennis coach. Yeah. He got fired yesterday, and I'm sure a lot of other big names are going to come out as this investigation goes on. Just a blockbuster story nationally.
It is, and again, on the heels of that college basketball scandal that broke with the payments to induce recruits and the shoe companies, and those obviously are cases that are now being played out in court and people found guilty. So it's just, to me, when you talk about what did I learn from all this, I mean, we all know that people out there, you know, with money and privilege are trying to use that to better their situation. But to have coaches involved in, you know, making a kid out to be a recruit when they aren't, taking, you know, Cedric, that number of $60,000 getting paid in a hotel parking lot. I mean, that's
how crazy is that?
It's crazy to me. I mean, how does that even happen? Do you have do you have a briefcase of money that somebody walks in with and it's just, to me, it's crazy stuff. It feels like it's not possible, but it's a reminder to me through both of these FBI investigations just how big the money is in college athletics. It's a reminder. I maybe didn't learn that, but you also have to think about the fact that when the NCAA is out there trying to regulate college athletics, it's really impossible. I mean, Cedric, it's impossible that the NCAA could know about all of this. Some of the stuff, the shoe companies and the basketball teams and, you know, all of that, I mean, I think everybody thinks, well, surely the NCAA was aware that there's some dirty dealings out there. But now you're talking about rowing coaches and tennis coaches and you know, these sports that aren't revenue generating at most schools. The NCAA doesn't have the bandwidth to go out and try to figure out who's taking 60 grand in a hotel parking lot. Cedric, it just, to me, it speaks to just how difficult a job that is. And what's the NCAA supposed to do? I mean, I don't know how you monitor all of this, how you regulate all this. I really don't think you can.
You cannot. And what it also sends a message to me is rich people think they can get away with anything, man.
Yep.
I mean, it's not like their kids, Lori Loughlin's kids or William H. Macy's kids. It's not like they didn't already have advantages in life. I think Lori Loughlin, I read, spent $500,000 to try to get her daughters into USC.
Yeah.
You know, it would have been cheaper to just get a tutor, I would think. But here's where the rubber meets the road to me. Not only did that happen, but one of the daughters was on a TMZ video talking about, well, I really didn't want to go to school. I'm going to Fiji next week, and I don't really care about class. Why should she? She's never had to lift a finger to do a day of hard work in her life. So the entitled have been allowed to move along under the radar, paying these massive amounts of money to this shady guy to ensure that their kids get into these prestigious schools so they can maintain their social standing. It's disgusting, and I gotta tell you, it was kind of refreshing to see some rich people going to jail for a change for breaking laws. I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think there are going to be more names that come out, and I'm just going to be sitting back and enjoying the show, because Full House was a pretty good show. This reality television is a lot better.
Hey, there's Fuller House now, which you got to wonder, is that on the ropes if Aunt Becky can't be in the show? I mean, I don't know.
Maybe they can shoot her from a jail cell. That'd be great.
Somebody, I actually saw something today that there was an episode of Full House back in the day that Aunt Becky gave Uncle Jesse a really hard time for fibbing on their little kid's application to preschool or something. The irony is thick, Cedric. It's thick, I say. But yeah, this whole thing is, I mean, it has to make everybody involved with college athletics, whether you're an athletic director, whether you're a non-revenue sport administrator, whether you're the president of the NCAA, everybody has to be taking stock of things right now, because this is just another layer of scandal, of undermining the system, big money. I mean, all of these things that people really lament about causing problems in college athletics just continues to pile up. And I said earlier, I don't know how the NCAA monitors it, but they're going to have to figure out ways to continue to keep, increasing levels of security on their coaches, on their athletes, on their teams, to try to avoid this. And, frankly, now that the FBI is interested in the level of money that's out there, I don't think this, Cedric, in the same way you said, I don't think this is the last of the names that are going to be implicated. I'm not sure this is the last of the investigations that we're going to see out there involving college athletics. We may be talking about these sorts of things for many years to come if you've got the feds involved in looking at college athletics now. Lots out there yet to be decided. We'll continue to follow it here. But that's it for the Writer's Block. Hey, Ced, thanks for joining us again this week.
Well, you know what? One last thought. The feds really hit a home run on this one. They couldn't tell me who killed Biggie or Tupac, but at least they're making some high-profile arrests. I like it.
Getting the Texas tennis coach out on his keister. All right, we'll see what happens next with that. Thanks for joining us on the Writer's Block. We'll see you next week.